Hello, I'm Khan Ross, former British diplomat and diplomatic advisor. What can events this past week tell us about the deeper forces shaping our world? I wish I could talk about Wimbledon or the Club World Cup, which I have been happily watching with my son, but it is grimmer business that is before us. This week, the European Court of Human Rights held that Russia had committed human rights abuses on a massive scale in Ukraine, including widespread sexual violence, torture, including strangling and electric shocks, as well as mock executions and amputations. Many of the abuses described in this report are simply horrific. The UN last year reported that Russia had established a system of torture, starting with special units at the front lines to torment and assault captured Ukrainian soldiers, then to larger camps behind the front lines to subject them to systematic and long-term torture. Meanwhile, Russia is dramatically increasing the scale of its drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, which are designed to terrorize, demoralize, and of course, kill civilians. Russia's campaign against Ukrainian civilians and its accompanying rhetoric denying the existence of Ukraine as a separate country or people amounts to genocide, according to several qualified authorities. In Sudan, there have been innumerable war crimes and atrocities by both sides in the country's civil war, but particularly by the so-called Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. As documented by the International Criminal Court, UN and human rights NGOs, the RSF are responsible for several instances of mass killings of non-Arabs, plausibly amounting to genocide. The widespread use of sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, and enforced sexual slavery, including for girls as young as 12. The RSF is supported, financed, and armed by the United Arab Emirates. Quite why is not clear to me. Apparently, it's something to do with control of resources. But the UAE is a Western ally, as well as a playground for Western tourists, celebrities, and online influencers, who can be seen in their TikTok feeds sunning themselves and sipping cocktails in rooftop swimming pools in Dubai, including the likes of David Beckham and inevitably the Kardashians. Its role in facilitating genocide is rarely mentioned, if ever. The Sudanese government has taken UAE's complicity in genocide to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. The US, France, Britain, and many other supposedly rights-respecting countries continue to sell weapons to the UAE, some of which find their way into the hands of the RSF. Ambassadors of those countries spend significant, if discreet, energy to sell fighter jets, rifles, and artillery that the UAE does not need, but somehow mysteriously still buys. Doubtless they are rewarded in their career assessments when they score a particularly lucrative sale. Those responsible for terrible crimes are getting away with it. Others are directly supported and armed by our own governments in the West. Israeli forces are daily killing children, lining up for food, water and medical supplies in Gaza. Meanwhile, the British government this week prescribed as a terrorist organisation not those perpetrating these monstrous crimes, but those who are protesting against them, namely Palestine Action, a non-violent direct action protest group. 3 genocides, mass killings in all cases, total impunity. 1 perpetrator supported by Western countries, of course Israel, another whose supporters are Western allies, and only in Ukraine is Putin condemned as the criminal he is, though of course he has yet to face any consequences, let alone the prosecution and imprisonment he deserves, and Donald Trump calls him a nice guy. This week also saw the 30th anniversary of the mass murder of more than 8,000 Bosnian Muslims by Serb forces in Srebrenica, killings that took place in full view of outside countries and where most of the killers went unpunished. This genocide is supposed to serve as a reminder of the requirement to prevent genocide ever occurring again. But Srebrenica carries lessons very relevant for today. Each time a genocide happens, the deliberate killing of a group because of its race or ethnicity, it is only condemned piecemeal, and the guilty are only rarely prosecuted, and then late and slowly. Srebrenica demonstrated that the world was content to stand by while mass murder took place, Rwanda likewise, and today Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine. At this point, people tend to say things like "never again" when such sentiments are demonstrably hollow, or "will humanity never learn?" an empty rhetorical question like the so-called question of evil takes us nowhere. What tends to happen is that individual leaders such as Putin or the RSF's commanders or Serbia's Milosevic are at least eventually correctly vilified as the criminal leaders and instigators, but it is only a few. Recent history, including of today, suggests that this very limited accountability is utterly insufficient to deter future genocidaires. 3 genocides are happening right now, and that's ignoring the systematic repression and abuse of various ethnic groups around the world, including Tibetans and Uyghurs in China, for instance, where women are forcibly sterilized in order slowly to annihilate those ethnicities. It would help if today's supposedly civilized countries would admit their own genocides of the past, such as Germany's mass slaughter in the country that was later to become Namibia, or Belgium's killings of perhaps 10 million Congolese during its appalling reign of colonial rule. Britain's actions in the subcontinent, for instance its role in causing the deaths of 3 million people during the 1943 Bengal famine, also amount to genocide. In Africa, the enslavement of millions for centuries was enthusiastically and lawfully practiced by Europeans and white Americans, or, dare I say it, the slaughter of indigenous peoples of America by European settlers and later the US government, a genocide that ended only in 1890 with the massacre at Wounded Knee, and arguably continued with cultural destruction, government violence, forced sterilization and forced assimilation well into the 20th century, and arguably even today. The only genocide in history that has been thoroughly confessed to and scrutinized in detail is, of course, the Holocaust. Germany has set an example of accounting for and examining its role in the genocide of perhaps 11 million Jews, Roma, gay and disabled people by the Nazis. Other countries, however, have yet to own up to their own actions which, to a degree, and only a degree, helped the Nazis in preparing the genocide. The widespread anti-Semitism of other European countries and the US, for instance, the depiction of Jews as a problem, a term the American ambassador to Berlin used with Hitler. Who today remembers the Evian Conference on Jewish refugees in 1938, convened by that nice Mr. Roosevelt, where 32 countries agreed to do nothing about the immigration restrictions on the numbers of German Jews escaping the Nazis that they were prepared to allow in. One country alone agreed to take more Jewish refugees. But even in Germany there is Holocaust denial. Until banned under the law, the slogan "Alles für Deutschland" was chanted at political rallies for the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland. The slogan was originally that of the Sturmabteilung, or SA, the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, which perpetrated the beatings, humiliations, tortures and murders of Jews and the Nazis' political opponents in the years leading up to and during the Hitler dictatorship, including the notorious pogrom, the so-called Kristallnacht in 1938, when thousands of Jewish businesses and hundreds of synagogues were attacked and destroyed across Germany. Hundreds killed and hundreds more committed suicide rather than face the savagery of the SA. 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps. After the ban, AfD supporters changed their chant to Alles für Deutschland, referencing Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD, as a cynical way of showing their defiance of the ban. A leading member of the AfD would work up crowds at party rallies by shouting "Alles für" before the audience shouted back "Deutschland." But amid this grim history and present, there are lessons to be learned that might help prevent future genocides. All genocides, whether in Bosnia, Gaza or Rwanda, share one common feature: the dehumanization of the victims. Bosniaks, Rwandan Tutsis and Jews were depicted as subhuman and are also notably responsible for the country's problems. In Germany, Jews were presented as the cause of the country's humiliation in the First World War and the economic disaster of the 1920s and 30s. Bosniaks were presented in Serbian propaganda as Muslim extremists, Islamists intent on destroying supposedly ancient Christian culture in former Yugoslavia. Tutsis, murdered in their hundreds of thousands by Hutus, were called cockroaches. All ludicrous, almost playground accusations, but widely believed. Root causes should matter to us, and which I try to uncover in today's events in these videos. It is dehumanization of other peoples and races that mark the origin of every genocide now and in history. Not every instance of dehumanization will lead to a genocide, of course, but it always causes harm of some kind when Donald Trump denigrates shithole countries, blames migrants for eating pets and committing violent crime, or when Nigel Farage, here in Britain, laments the demise of British Christian culture, thereby by implication, by dog whistle, attacking the non-Christian inhabitants of my country. And of course we all know he means Muslims. I note that Britain is a country where only 10% of the population regularly attend Christian church. That means just once a month. It was the same percentage 40 years ago, indicating that it is not immigration that has undermined Christian observance. It is the long-standing secularization of modern society. Dehumanization reached grotesque proportions in Nazi Germany, Rwanda, and former Yugoslavia. A routine trope in all three was the killing and sometimes consumption of babies by the marginalized and soon-to-be annihilated group, a trope that has notably cropped up in explaining Israel's actions in Gaza. But by the time we see such characterizations emerge, it is too late, far too late. The dehumanization of the other has reached its peak. Their destruction comes next. Instead, look out for routine or legalized or legally ignored discrimination, dog whistling, overt and implicit racism. Indeed, the very notion that other humans are different from us, whoever that is in our long hybrid histories, and thereby less worthy. This is where dehumanization begins. I have had the privilege of living in many different countries during my adult life. I count many different nationalities among my friends. My children enjoy 3 different nationalities. And of course, platitude alert, what I see is that we are all pretty much the same. Sahrawi, Kurdish, Somali, Welsh. Our desire for peace, security, and sufficient for a decent and dignified life for ourselves and our children is exactly the same. It shouldn't need mentioning, but unfortunately does, that the biological genetic differences between different quote-unquote races is nil, as confirmed by numerous scientific studies. Indeed, the very notion of race, of difference itself, originated in the colonial era as a justification for domination, exploitation, and the theft of territory and destruction of culture. It was a political or social construction created to justify violent conquest and eradication of native populations, in other words, genocide. It is in fact only the genocidaires who are different, those who commit genocide. When they allege difference, claim threats to their supposedly monolithic and uniquely valuable culture, and attribute everything that's wrong to other groups, immigrants, other faiths, women, it is at this point and not a moment later that they must be resisted, as if we were resisting genocide itself. It is all too evident that this point has been reached in political discourse in today's America, Britain, and indeed Germany and across Europe. That point is, however, and tragically, long past in Russia, Israel, and Sudan. where never again has indeed happened again. Thank you.